let's get started. Welcome back to Play.Hype.Dialogue Season 2, sponsored by GameStop. Just kidding. Don't sue us. Don't come for us, Reddit. So we are back. We've been on a little bit of a break, and we're diving in with some new content, some new material, and a little bit of a new structure. And today we're going to be talking about one of the biggest shows that's out right now, which is Bridgerton, which I think just broke Netflix's top most watched show ever of their original shows. So that's pretty exciting. And we're going to jump all up into the conversation about race and historical accuracy and the show's portrayal of people of color. We're going to talk about gender and sexuality. So we're going to get all up in there with Bridgerton. But before we jump in, just in case you forgot who we are, this is Carmela,
Carlos,
Omar.
And Carlos is going to talk to us for a minute about what our new structure is going to be like coming in hot for season 2.
So this time around, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Instead of having a weekly episode where we go episode by episode of a series, we're going to be doing monthly episodes where we talk about a season entirety or a film in its entirety and really dive deeper into some of the broader themes and some of the broader issues in said topic, while also bringing it into context of some of the things that are happening in the world around us or in the larger cinematic universe that is Hollywood, Nollywood, Bollywood, etc., etc.
Okay.
Love it. Omar, did you want to add anything, or should we just jump in on Bridgerton?
I want to add that I had no intention of watching this show, and then these two jackweeds like forced me to watch it, and
really?
Damn, I became hooked. I was just like, fuck, this is actually like interesting stuff to talk about. It's cool because apparently me and 82 other million people, we're into it. So
yeah, it's spicy. It's real spicy. It's real sexy.
It's messy. It's messy. It's a messy
it's
show.
Spicy.
Messy.
It's saucy. It's a little messy. Everything we love to talk about. So why don't we start with kind of first impressions? Omar, let's start with you. What are your kind of big takeaways from the show?
Yeah, well, one, I did not want to like it. Two, you know what? The biggest takeaway was like how important communication is. Like, as everyone's like going through their shit, I'm like, do you realize how much easier your lives would be if you just communicated with each other, like just was honest and told each other what's what? Like, I remember I was just watching it like this, like felt like this adult, like, y'all kids need to talk to each other. But yeah, that was my other take was like, it's interesting that this became the biggest hit of Netflix. You know what I mean? And I'm wondering why. And that's not, and I don't mean like it doesn't deserve it. I'm just like wondering, like, what is it about this show that made so many people tune in? Was it the sex? Was it Shonda? Was it the story? Was it like people? I mean, here's the thing. I love a period piece, but I wasn't like super excited about this one. But it was interesting because my mom and I are both big fans of period pieces, and one of our complaints was always like, it's too many like white stories. There's not enough like people of color in these shows or movies. And so I even question why I was like kind of not too hyped about this one, but now I am. So damn it.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely think that's a big conversation. Carlos, what was your first impressions and takeaways?
I mean, so I'm usually not that big into period pieces. They're sort of hit or miss for me. But I was like, this one looks bright and colorful. It doesn't seem to sort of fall into some of the trappings that some European period pieces can fall into. And it was a lot hornier than I thought it was going to be. Like, people were like, oh, there's a lot of sex. And I'm like, okay, there's a lot of sex. But then I watched it and I was like, there's a lot of sex. And not in the sort of missionary that you might be used to seeing in these pieces. Like, they go in a variety of different ways that I was not expecting. I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I'm not watching this with my mother or with my aunt. Like, this is, watch it by yourselves, people. If you haven't already, do not watch it with your parents.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like so I saw like the preview before, early on, like a couple months before it came out, or whenever the preview came out, the algorithm showed it to me. I guess I'm in the target audience. And I knew I was going to be seeing my mom over the holidays, which I hadn't obviously much because of quarantine. And I sent it and I was like, we're going to watch this when it comes out. It came out on Christmas Day. So I was excited for it. It looked really good to me. As far as period pieces, I feel like I wouldn't say I'm like, oh, I'm a big fan of period pieces, but I saw like Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. So I feel like it's definitely there. It's not something I've sought out, but I think that question that Omar brought up about why this became so popular is really kind of at the core of the conversation about Bridgerton. I really enjoyed it, and the kind of like more diverse casting, I do think made it a lot more enjoyable to watch for like a contemporary audience. Definitely for me and my fiance and our family, it's just like way more enjoyable to watch than a straight up like all white people in Regency era England. But as I'm sure we're going to talk about, I do think it like brings up some issues. And it, for me, like the big parallel, I'm not the only person talking about this, but like it's the Hamilton question, right? Like that same question of like, okay, well, if you throw people of color into the story, that's still essentially kind of like a story of colonizers or a European or a white story. Does it really undermine kind of the main actual dynamics of the story? So I feel like we're going to get into the weeds of that, but that was my big takeaway. I mean, I personally, individually, I loved it. Like I really, really enjoyed it. Intellectually, like as a social scientist, I think we can definitely pull out some serious critiques. Oh, and also I enjoyed it being, it's like explicitly kind of a feminist series, or it strives toward that, which is enjoyable, and particularly because there's like many lead women characters who have very different stories and are in some cases different ages, which is really nice to watch.
Yeah, I definitely agree that they are striving for that. And as we sort of break it down, we'll talk about some of the areas where they did really well with that, and some of the areas where they didn't maybe do so well with that.
Yeah, definitely. So let's start. I feel like in the first couple of episodes when we're watching the setup, did anybody have a favorite character that they feel like they want to jump in on?
Day one, day one, it was her. I was like, that was my favorite. When she walked in the room and she was like, Mom, how do you, like, she just blatantly asked, like, how does one become a child? I was like, yo, she's my favorite. She called people out. She got like a little bit, like I was a little frustrated with her, with like her basically trying to push her own wants onto Penelope a little bit. She was like, we don't need to get married. We can just do this and this and that. And Penelope was like, maybe I don't want that. And I was kind of like, yeah, Louise. But still, I loved her. She's my favorite, hands down. Closer, here's the thing. I didn't expect to like, I like the Bridgerton mom. Because, you know, like usually like the moms in these pieces are like really like backwards thinking and like they have to rebel, like Mrs. Featherington. Sorry. But no, but
correct.
The Bridgerton mom, I liked her a lot. I liked her a lot, especially because she called out one of my least favorite characters, which was Anthony. Like she was like, listen, you are fucking up all over the place. And she would like tell him what's what. And I really appreciated that about her.
That was refreshing because, you know, when you watch a character like Anthony was clearly set up to be kind of like antagonistic in the first episode or two, and he was so freaking annoying. I mean, he stays that way, but he gets a little better. Those first two episodes, I'm just like, this guy, like, and it's refreshing to have this scene where she she calls him out for like what the audience is watching as really obnoxious behavior, rather than, I feel like a lot of times they have characters like that and then just leave it and I'm just still annoyed. So I'm like, at least someone said it. Let
I
him
know the
know.
mom, because usually the mom's like, "No, my boy." You know, she was like, "Shut up, Anthony." Yeah, I was like, "No," but it's interesting because the mains like Daphne and Simon, they were fine, but definitely not who I watched the story for.
Except the sex scenes. Sorry. Just kidding.
I mean, Duke Simon, body, yada, 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 yada.
I felt their sex scenes weren't it like, I don't know. Well, I mean, I've watched like European like from Spain. I'm just like, okay, those are some sex scenes, but no, these were tame in comparison. But
I think what got me was just the amount of sex scenes in episode 6.
It was a lot
between them in like different places, which I get was the point of that, but I'm like, wow. But Carlos, I feel like I jumped over you a little bit. You were gonna come in.
Oh no, that's totally fine. Because I got distracted by his body in
by
those
talking
scenes.
about.
I was like, I could look into sort of the story logic in that episode. It's like, no, that's not what the focus is, and I don't think that's what the episode wants you to do with episode 6. Like, no, that's not what you're here for.
I forgot the question was, who's your favorite character? although is this like very clear now?
I'm trying to defend the Duke a little.
Well, they had that meme going around that I'm sure everybody has seen that was like, I watched Bridgerton for the plot. And then it's like the plot. And it's the picture of the Duke. I'm like, yeah, sounds about right.
Yes, that is the plot that I was tuning in for. But I also love Eloise. I love, she's very much like Jo from Little Women, sort of like not interested in playing by the rules, sticking by the expectations of her time period, of her era. It did get a little pushy with Penelope, and throughout the series, obviously there's going to be some spoilers here, folks. They do have a fight because of that. And I feel like their reunion towards the end of the season feels genuine, given the way they sort of broke up and what they broke up over. The friendship breakup, they weren't a couple. I did like that. I really am excited for a second season just to explore the lives of the other siblings more. Like I feel like not the younger ones, because I don't the baby sister and baby brother, it's like no, but not about them. But Benedict, Eloise, sort of not just being Detective Eloise. I thought the mom was dope. Lady Whistledown's character, who we don't see on screen, but it's kind of like a Gossip Girl type situation where everybody's drama is published in a newsletter that Lady Whistledown sends out. And so we don't see her, but her specter is hanging over the whole show. And I love that. Like, she is an icon. Iconic.
And of course, as I'm sure anybody listening to this knows by this point, there's like the full book series with one book focusing on each Bridgerton. And they already announced season 2 is coming out. I'm kind of focusing more on Anthony, which they set up at the end of the season.
I'm not looking forward to.
Well, so this is what I love, and it builds on what both of you just said. I feel like what really makes this, it really shows that it's like a Shonda's been involved, is partly the fact that like there's this ensemble cast, you know. So even as I was watching it, you're like, okay, Daphne and the Duke are like the main characters of this season, but I'm interested in so many characters, and that's the type of thing that I feel like can pull me through a number of seasons. And so even if like Anthony's technically the focus of next season, I feel like we're going to see these other characters, and there's so much to be invested in, and I'm sure new people will be introduced as well. So I love the relationship between Eloise and Penelope. I thought was a really fantastic friendship to explore. They had like a real nice arc with that. I really enjoyed Marina as a character and her arc. I know that a lot of people have kind of talked about her being kind of the only younger woman of color who has a fleshed out role in the series, and it being like a pretty tragic trajectory. So I do think that's one of the things that's like a little bit problematic about the show, in terms of their quote unquote colorblind casting, but it's like it's not actually colorblind casting. It's kind of like color intentional casting. But for me, just like on a character level, first of all, the actor that played her, I felt like knocked it out of the park. Like she had, I really enjoyed a couple of the scenes, especially where she was with the mother, the Mrs. Featherington character, when she basically, like the scene where Mrs. Featherington takes Marina to the hood, like she takes her to like the poor area where the London poors live, and she's like, look at this, and she's like, Marina's like, are you freaking kidding me? You think you're gonna scare me with this? I thought she did beautiful acting work in the beginning, middle, and end of the series, but I also thought the storyline was compelling, and I thought the way it concluded was interesting, and I'm hoping, spoiler alert for anyone who is not reading articles about the books, I haven't read the books, but I've now immersed myself in like articles about Bridgerton, and I'm hoping that they don't do her storyline from the books in the show, and I'm thinking that they won't, but we'll see. That'll be something that for me kind of retroactively makes or breaks this first season for her. In the book, she's a really minor character, and I won't say what happens to her in case anybody like wants to go read those books, but I'm hoping they do something different with her storyline and that we see her again. But she may also be someone that's not back after this season. Maybe we'll get some other characters that come in instead. But yeah, and so Daphne and the Duke, it's always like the main characters, you're kind of like, they've got like the most traditional story. It was maybe not as interesting as some of the side characters, but I enjoyed them. I thought the Duke's storyline in the middle was like a little hard to watch. It's just a lot. Just like, oh, but I made this promise on my father's deathbed, and so I'm gonna like tank my life. It's just it was drawn out a little bit, but the payoff then was really strong for him as a character, I thought. So I enjoyed that.
I thought it brought it. It felt like it was stretched out too much. You know what I mean? Like it's
yes, I agree.
Like, all right, we get it. Like the problem is, like, I can't have children. I can't. I'm like, we get it. I think if maybe to make it a little bit less stretched out is like he keeps like maybe if they introduce his backstory later, because I think they did in episode 2. I think if they saved it for like maybe 4 or 5, and then because then you could be like why won't he have kids? Why? And then you're like, oh, that's why. Like then I think it might have been like a little bit easier to watch, because to find out so early why, and then for him to just be on this like very kind of trauma-filled like vendetta. I mean, I don't even like to use the word vendetta against his father, because I mean what that was, we saw an incredibly traumatic childhood and the results. And so it was actually like, I remember when he finally opened up to Daphne, I was a little bit disappointed at her reaction. Like I kind of wanted her to be like, well, thank you for telling me. But she was like, what? This is why? Because of some bullshit promise you made to your dad? I was like, whoa, let's have some respect for, this incredible. I was like, listen, you had a very supportive family network. Like you have both parents who loved each other, which is huge. And this guy literally had almost the complete opposite of what you had. And I just wish he had a little more empathy for him when he finally opened up. I do think. Oh my
God, I don't feel that way at all.
Well, you're bugging. No, because like when he finally opened up, which took, I was like, homeboy, you need to tell her immediately. Like, why are you taking so long?
Exactly.
Like, finally tell her. Like your story, like if you love her and she's your wife, just tell her what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, and that's why I was like, communication, people. Like, so, but yeah.
I just felt like by the time we get to that scene where she like finds out what the deal is, they've gone through so much, and he's like basically like manipulated her by acting like he physically can't have children. So at that point, it's like, are you serious? Like, you're gonna bring down both of our lives because of this like promise that you're tied up in, which I thought it was really compelling. And I just don't think her reaction was like, I didn't think it was particularly harsh given how serious that circumstance was set up to be, right? Because remember, they only got into that marriage because he like kissed her, which in the like error that and the parameters that they're trying to set up in this like semi-alternate reality, but like drawing on some things from reality, that's it. Like, she's tainted, they have to get married. So basically she's like, you kissed me in the dark walk, almost died like dueling my brother, and then we had to get married, and now you're like, wait, this is because I like deathbed promised not to have kids to my dad. So I get the like, are you kidding me?
I mean, you talked about him manipulating her, but you left out a very crucial part of.
Well, yeah, because we're not talking about that yet, but we can if we're ready to.
I think we kind of have to now. I think we've kind of put ourselves there.
Get in there.
Yeah.
So one of the quotes I have written down from Daphne, who at the beginning I was like, okay, she's not terrible.
Wait, hold on. I think we should also like do a trigger warning, content warning right now.
Yes.
So we're gonna talk about. Well, Carlos, were you about to do it?
Yeah, I was gonna sort of segue.
Cool. Go for it. You got
it. So one of the quotes that I have written down is from Daphne, who at the beginning of the show, I'm like, okay, she's just a regular woman, like nothing really special in terms of sort of her plot. Was really into the Duke for plot reasons. But as the story progresses, there's something that you may have read about or heard about. So this is where we're going to give you a content warning that we are going to be talking about rape and sexual assault briefly. So if you want to skip ahead, now would be the time to do that, or just be aware that this is where the conversation is going. So Daphne in an earlier episode says, "You do not trick the one you love." And I couldn't, so I binged this all in one night. I was like, I must keep going. I was texting Mela in the group chat at first, and then in our one-on-one chat about like what was happening. Daphne says this and then proceeds to rape him premeditatively. Like, she planned to do this after putting pieces together that this is how sex works. And if you want to make a baby, you need to have your partner's ejaculation. Can we say that on the air?
Sure.
Inside of you. Because her parents, her mother, because we don't see her father, he's already passed, doesn't teach them about sex in any way. It's part of the culture where young ladies and young women just don't talk about or engage in any conversation about sex. So she has no clue what to expect when she finally hooks up with the Duke. I'm not sure how, so he finishes outside of her every time they have sex. And she's telling a friend like, oh, he said he couldn't have kids, and I don't see any deformity. I don't see anything wrong. So I guess it wasn't as bad as I thought. And then you find out through one of her friends, I think it's her handmaid that goes with her to the new castle. Yeah. Who explains how it's the seed that helps one to make a baby. So in their Congress, she climbs on top, which the Duke did not expect and seems to be into. And then she keeps going and going after he's like, wait, and does not want to finish inside of her. And she makes him, which some people have looked at as being very murky at best. I'm going to come down firmly and be like, this was premeditated rape.
Yeah, agreed. And it was very much like, she was furious when she found out, right? Because, he from the beginning, before they got married, he said, I can't have children. And, you know, that's when she talks about there's a very big difference between can't and won't.
Mm-hmm.
You made me think it was physically impossible for you, not that it's something that you didn't want. And like, there's a whole thing about that, right? So when she finds out that that's why he keeps like finishing out, you know, outside of her, and then she finds out like, oh, that's what he's doing. Then she's like, and it's weird because like after they, you know, they finish, well, he finishes, she like gets up and he's like, what did you do? And she was like, what did you do? And it becomes this really, really intense moment. And I remember like, I was like, because I had heard that there was a rape scene in this. And when I saw it, it like took me a second. I was like, wait a minute, was that it? And then I was like, yeah, he's clearly not wanting to finish inside of her, you know, and she forces him to. And you know, spoiler alert, people, you can be in the middle of sex, and if they want to stop, you have to stop. If not, it's rape. So yeah.
Yeah, so my take on this is I mean, first of all, I think it's like clearly rape. Especially again with like kind of our lens put on it.
Mm-hmm.
One thing though that bothers me about the conversation that I mean, I haven't read every single thing that's been written on this. I've just looked at it a little bit. But I do think the show establishes this context. Two major things they establish. One is that they establish this context where it's like race is doesn't have like the role that it had in reality.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're in an alternate universe where like there's people of color in the aristocracy. But they do establish that like gender relations are basically like similar to what they were, maybe a little bit different, but generally it's like you get like you kiss, like you're tainted, you better get married. All of your agency in life comes from your ability to like pull a husband, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, amongst this like tiny social strata. So that's established. And then like Daphne and the other young ladies are also established as like literally not knowing how sex works. And like how a baby's made, right? So those things are established in the first episode or two of the series. So one thing that has like not bothered me, but like has stayed with me about this conversation about this scene is that first of all, like for week after week, like all of these times that we're watching them have sex, like he's manipulating her by knowing that he knows how a baby gets made from sex. He knows that he probably can have children but doesn't want to, and that like by pulling out and not ejaculating in her, he's preventing that. And he takes that information away from her intentionally because he knows that she doesn't know. And so that's sustained for like all of the first, I don't know how long the time period's supposed to be, a couple weeks maybe, that they're having all that sex everywhere. And to me, like in that sense, he's also taking away her like informed consent about what they're doing knowingly that whole time. You know what I mean? Like he knows the whole time that she doesn't know, and he takes advantage of it. Yeah. And so that it bothers me a little bit that there's been just like tons of think pieces about the rape scene. And again, like it is, and it's important, like, especially because we don't always see like men get the same kind of, I guess like, ability to name something as rape necessarily, especially kind of mid-coitus. But it bothers me that there's so much focus on that. And to me, like he's actively, consistently kind of taken away her full sense of informed consent in a context that they've laid out in which women effectively don't even have really the right to consent or not consent to sex within the confines of a marriage. So I think that that's important because rape and sexual assault, like many other, like, you know, a lot of the other stuff that we address also has to do with power. And the way that this show is set up, like he's a man of color. So, you know, that would hold a very different weight if we were in if we're in the real world, but the way the context of the show is set up they sort of address it. We'll get to that in a minute, but basically to set up is like, he has all the power, right? He's a wealthy duke with this house that like, has tainted her or whatever. They're married, and this is it for her. Like, she's in the marriage, and that's that. So I think that power question is also important, and that's not to say like it wasn't rape and it wasn't wrong, but I still think there's been a lot of attention on it, and once again, and even in this like woke discourse conversation, less on the fact that like she's basically like in a contract that dictates her entire life, and again, like effectively doesn't have consent, and on top of that, he played her for like weeks. So I think that's a part of the conversation that's important too.
I mean, Simon's definitely in the doghouse as well, because of like everything that you said, like, and it's withholding information, using his power, like that's all like, yeah, like that's, to me, that is a form of sexual assault as well. You know what I mean? Like not informing your partner of something. So.
And I'm glad. I mean, so I think, did we mention this? But I know in the book, or were we recording already, or were we just talking about this? In the book, they make it that he's like passed out drunk, and she like realizes she could do whatever with him.
What? That's so much
they
worse.
Did. It's so much worse. That's what I read. I haven't read the book.
They said that in the book. It's like way more. The way that the article that I read, I think it was really weird how they discussed it. They were saying that in the book, it's way more clearly a rape, whereas in the show, it left a lot of people questioning whether or not it was rape. But
right, because it was also quick. It was quick in the show, like, and so there's that ambiguity of like, was that intended to be like she forced him, or she tricked him, or was it like he got overwhelmed with passion, which I think is pretty dangerous territory for something that might as well be clearly framed as rape, but I do feel like the big takeaway for a lot of people has been like it was rape, but it also, I mean, it also seems like talking about what's realistic doesn't really make sense in like a fantasy series, but it seems like a somewhat like realistic or logical move. I mean, in theory, she could have been like, yo, I figured out what is happening here. And that would have been much better.
Communication. The word of the day is communication.
Yeah. But
he definitely also should have communicated what he meant when he said he can't have children. Like that was fucked up on his part on many levels. And I think it would have been helpful if he explained to her, not at the very last episode what happened with his father. Mm-hmm. Do we want to talk about Simon's childhood now?
Well, I just want to know if Carlos had anything else he wanted to add to this.
Yeah, I was just gonna,
because he looked like,
no, because I mean, this is a lot. Like, this could be an episode in and of itself, talking about sort of the intricacies of their relationship. I did have in my notes that he definitely took advantage of her as well, of her naivete and her lack of knowledge. But like Omar said at the beginning, communication. Like, so babe, when I said can, like, I mean, I am promise bound, duty bound to not give my father an heir because he was a piece of shit. And that's why when we have sex, I will finish outside of you. And then she could have been like, so I know how sex works now. What is this? What has been happening? Which could have, like, it's not. And so when we get into the conversation about historical realism, like, there's so many parts of this that are not realistic. And we'll get into that and talk about that more. I just think that it definitely isn't as worse as it could have been. But I definitely think this whole series of events in the Duke and Daphne storyline really taints like the middle to latter part of the show. That could have really been done very differently, planted stuff better, paid it off better.
Plus, I think I'm not trying to make it dramatic, but I don't know. It sends a kind of a problematic message out, I think, because in a sense, they're both have assaulted each other in different ways, but it's still portrayed as like a very loving relationship, which bothers me to an extent. And maybe I mean, granted, I understand that it's a TV drama, but I also think it is important to not show like it doesn't feel like love what we're watching. It feels like an infatuation, maybe. It feels like almost like a trauma bond. I don't know, but I and I understand like at the end, like they're able to communicate, but I think it is important that love doesn't look like there's no rape in love. There's no lying in love. There's no like just withholding information. I don't know. It bothered me that in a sense they were still portrayed as like this, like the most like loving couple. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like what Mela said earlier. It's a contract. She has no choice but to marry a man. So better her to marry one that she is infatuated with, might be in love with, at least in their conception of it before they get together. Having different goals, different end games. He doesn't want kids. She does. Like that's a big sticking point for them because part of her sort of understanding of her duty is to reproduce children, and there's sort of a cultural cachet to having kids, especially if you can find someone to love you because you don't have an option. Like the mother, Lady Bridgerton, is stuck taking orders from her son because she can't have any autonomy to herself. Lady Featherington is fucked over by her gambler of a husband multiple times in the series because she can't have money herself and be in charge of things. She has to deal with him.
And remember that if in the scenario where Daphne doesn't have children, if something were to happen to the Duke, she'd be screwed, right? Like that house would go to a male relative. Like you even see I think it's even the Queen. At some point they're like, oh, they go to one of the balls and they're like, oh, there's our host. Do we have to go to sleep if he does? Because it's like a 2-year-old boy, because like the property and the titles go to the male heir. And part of the purpose of having children was to like make sure you pop out a boy. So that, again, that power relationship is really important. I was going to say something else about this. Oh, I was going to add too, that I do feel like, I don't know, like, even though that question of like, oh, well, that's not love, I agree. But I also think like we watch them struggle. Like a lot of this show is like them in conflict with each other. And I do feel like they're supposed to be very young characters navigating like a very strict set of social laws and rules. So I don't think it's like outrageous to watch them, to see them do like some fucked up shit, basically, to each other. And I don't think for me that makes it like, oh, well, so like they're tanked as a relationship. I think especially if I would like to see if season 2 picks up with them still working through their issues as opposed to like, like a dainty and happy, everything's wonderful. Because that to me would be a little bit more powerful as well. Just to see like that they did some traumatizing stuff to each other as they were each working. I mean, he was working through his like childhood trauma. And she was working through the stress of the marriage market and surviving that.
I think he wasn't working through his childhood trauma though.
I mean, go ahead.
No, I think he wasn't. Like it came at the final end when he finally was able to like acknowledge it. But I wouldn't say that this whole time he was working through it. I think this whole time he had like made his decision and he was being very sort of, I don't want to say stuck, but that's where he stayed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that was working through anything. I think it was him literally just not moving forward with it until he finally opened up. I think that's when it started.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think the way the series ends on their story arc is that there is a moment of reconciliation that needs to be followed up with healing work for both
Yeah.
of them with their stuff and their issues, but then also working together, which I think would make a better statement about loving relationships and what they're supposed to be if they follow it up with something better in the second season rather than just leaving it with like, oh, we're happy now at our ball, the season's over, yay, everything's back to normal.
That's why
doesn't send the same vibes.
Yeah, and that's why I wish they didn't have the baby at the end of the season. Like, I felt like there needed to be like, I would have liked to have seen like some more of that healing work that Carlos discussed before they have it, because then you don't want to get to be like, yay, this baby's gonna fix, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying like, there were clearly 9 months between, that and the baby being born, and who knows what they did. I feel like there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Like what he went through, Simon, was so incredibly traumatic that I kind of don't think that ball and then them like dancing in the rain was like, well, now I'm fixed. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think it was the most, and granted, I understand it's a family show. I understand people watch it to escape, but I also, I don't think it was a very accurate portrayal of what healing looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
let's talk daddy issues.
Let's. I hated this. I was because I watched it, after these two, and I kept texting them in the group chat like, he's a dick. I can't stand him. I have a problem that the character with the deepest complexion happens to be this guy, who is easily the most evil character on this show. More so than even, what was his name? Needlebrook?
Who?
The one who like was promised to Daphne in the beginning?
Oh, Nigel.
I'm looking him up.
I'm gonna just call him Nigel Needledick. Anyway, so he's like worse than him.
It was like Bearbrook or something. Yeah, he was worse than him.
Yeah, and so that was one thing about the colors of issue that I had an issue with. I was like, really? This guy is just this. It actually brings me to my favorite quote, was when Spider-Man was like, "Speak, you fucking monster." I was like, oh shit. So you understand why he made that promise. He wanted to devastate the man who just consistently traumatized and abused him emotionally his whole life. You know what I mean? Which is why I guess I wish Daphne had a little more empathy for the guy. Just be like, he went through hell growing up. And all the power that he felt that he could have was to refuse to give his father an heir, because that's all he wanted was an heir. You know what I mean? So that was him, in a sense, claiming some kind of a power. And I feel like, to be able to let that go, takes time. It's not like going to be like this one like instance of like, wow, my wife looks great in the rain. Like, let's have babies.
Yeah. But I think, if we're gonna apply like our current lens to this, we might as well also say, then this is actually, Omar, you said this before, but like Simon didn't really like do any work on that. It was just like, Daphne, fix it. Or Lady Denver, fix it. So, I think again, that's kind of like, oh, you gotta like get yourself some therapy, get yourself some like self-care or some community care. But I agree. I think there's more to do. And then we also we don't see a year or so.
Yeah, exactly.
Between the end and them having a baby. So I wonder if we'll see any of that maybe in flashbacks, or maybe not. But I agree, Omar, with your point about the father, Simon's father, being the kind of like most dark-skinned, like named character. on the show, and being like, he was such a jerk. Like, he was really shitty. And the one thing that bothered me about it was almost like a caricature, like why he was such like an asshole. Like, it's just like, okay, in the beginning, this is not acceptable, but it's like when Simon's really young and he can't talk, then the father's like really mad. But then there's that scene where Simon's like a little older, and goes to visit his father, and he's like, I make good marks and I'm very good at fencing and riding or whatever. And then he like stutters a little bit at the end, and the father's like, you're my biggest failure. And I'm just like, what? Like, it's totally unacceptable, but it was also like, this guy wanted an heir so badly. The kid's there. What? How does this make sense? So you had to suspend disbelief as well.
Yeah.
So I think like the darkest skin character, not only being a villain, but being one that like was just not as well fleshed out. I think it was a problem.
Yeah. Like, it was like, you don't get anything from him but pure evil, like from the guy. You know what I mean? It was so crazy to watch, and
I was pretty sure we were going to find out that was not his biological.
That's what I thought.
Father.
Yeah,
I think we might still, because of that scene with the main like
scene's maid being like,
the main maid being like, oh, you need strong seed, and then people are like, what he did to her mother. I mean, to Simon's mother, and I feel like we might still find out that wasn't his.
That's what I thought was in the letters. When Daphne found all those letters, I was like, oh, is that from like Simon's real dad?
Yeah, a couple times I thought we were gonna find out that like he was so mean to him because he wasn't like really his, which is like a cliche. But I was like, I don't know, it might still come back, but yeah. I do appreciate that they fleshed out Simon's background and they gave us a few glimpses, not just one, into his past. That gave him something, because otherwise the middle, when he was being like moody and I was like, I'm gonna need you to stop. Like, you get it, so it works,
No, it was them, the two of them. It was exhausting. I think it was stretched out too much. I get why, but I was like, come on. So,
Yeah, I love Lady Danbury, how she comes in, because she seems to be the late mom's only friend, to be there and support her because no one's in the room with her, which sort of flips at the end where when Daphne does have the baby, there's lots of people in the room. She has her support network there with her, which sucks. Like, you've been trying to get pregnant for how many years, and you finally do, and you can't have anyone in the room with you, and your husband takes the baby immediately into the hallway, and it's like, it's a boy, like Mufasa style, just about. It's like, no. Though I do wonder if we get to see any of that journey, how much of having Lady Danbury sort of helped, because she does seem to be a very sort of maternal figure with him. Obviously, that doesn't undo any of the stuff the father does, but it's also interesting that that's her story arc, and she's probably the darkest woman on the show, that she ends up raising someone else's kid, doesn't seem to be married or seem to have her own sort of journey other than, Simon, I'm having a party and you must come. I regret to send my, they say it's cute. He's like, oh, I'm not going to be able to attend. And she's like, I reject that. You're going to come. And he's like, I can pop by for a little while. I'm like, yes. But that's all she really gets to do, is sort of be a sort of puppeteer with Lady Bridgerton in the background, which when we talk more about race issues, I think is something we'll talk about with her as well.
And she does also have those like married ladies soirees, which I really enjoyed.
Yes,
just to like throw that in there. That was popping. I
yes. Which I don't know how realistic that was to history, but that's fucking dope. Like, you have a shitty life. You're not necessarily in a relationship you want to be in. Let's go party. Let's gamble. Let's drink.
It's just like such an interesting dichotomy too, of like the idea of like maintaining this like absolute like supposed purity pre-marriage, and then like once you're married, you know, it's just like, okay, you can like do all the things,
Bust
like,
down Tatiana,
while still like keeping your honor.
But
So
it's
I think
the dichotomy between like the two types of women also, because basically you have like, I don't know, like you have like the women who's like will not even kiss, like will, you know, have nothing, no knowledge about sex, and then you have the women who's going to like these artists like parties, who's like sleeping around. I'm like, damn, they're real. But it's interesting how it's portrayed as like there's two kinds of women. You're either like this one or that one. And
not
in
everyone's a lady.
Yeah, right. But yeah, I forgot my point. Anyway,
so let's talk about race then a little bit, because I feel like we've talked around it a few times. We might as well like dive in a little bit.
I mean,
the pros and cons. Go ahead, more.
Not even about race. Well, here's the thing: are we going to talk race, or are we going to talk colorism?
Let's talk both.
All right. My thing, when in the very first episode, it just felt like, okay, so this ton, which is the first time I ever heard that word, I was like, this ton just really likes some light skins, because everyone's going for Simon, everyone's going for Marina, everyone's going for Marina, and I'm just like, come on, like the sexualized like light skinned folk, and then the two people of the darkest complexion, one is like this horrible man, and this other woman is a widow, so in a sense she's desexualized, you know what I mean? And I was just like, come on, like, you know, and we see like a couple people with dark skin in the background. There was this one guy with like half blonde locks that I kept seeing in the background. I'm like, what's his story?
I know, he did see him a couple times. I'm like,
but it was just like, could it not have been cast as like either Simon or Marina? If they were cast as someone with like a much deeper complexion, I think it would have had like quite a powerful thing. And I understand, like, you know, it was like, you know, no, we just wanted, you know, the best actor, whatever. But it does say something when it, like, all the main ones, especially the sexualized main ones, are light skinned.
Yeah, I mean, the first like episode or two, I actually thought it was intentional, like built into the fabric of the show, in the sense that I thought they were doing like I thought they were setting it up to be like, there's some people of color, but it's like primarily lighter skinned people, or it's people who have one white parent or something, you know. So I was like, okay, so that's like what they're doing. And then you see as the show unfolds that like that's not really supposed to be what they're constructing as like the way that race works in world, in this kind of like alternate universe. So I do think I agree. Shoot, I was going to say something. I do. So I did like, I loved the actors for both the Duke and Marina. I will say that. But I also think they had like a very clear kind of colorism issue in their casting of people of color, of Black actors in particular. Not to jump here. Well, I think they're going to, my guess is that they're going to try to rectify it in the next season, because there's been like significant critique about it. But it definitely, I think what Omar, I agree with what you said about like, in particular, kind of younger people who are kind of seen as sexually viable, and the Black characters who fall into that category, both being lighter skinned, is definitely like, you know, it sends a powerful subliminal message as a viewer.
Which is why I was surprised, because it's like a Shondaland show.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was a little disappointing for me. Granted, yes, I think the diversity of the show is important, but yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't know if it's necessarily like as groundbreaking as some people make it out to be, because it's still very, kind of like, oh, the light skins are desirable, the dark skins are like desexualized or evil. Like I almost wonder if that's like more damaging that way.
I almost feel like it's almost like Bonilla Silva, like triracial to biracial. It's like the shifting of kind of a racial narrative that like opens up to include some lighter skinned aristocratic upper class people of color, but not darker skinned people, and not, obviously people with less means. And I do think that's a big part of the conversation as well. Which I actually don't want to interrupt this conversation to talk about like the fact that like we always only jump into this like aristocratic fantasy that was not the reality for like the vast majority of people, whether in real history or in fantasy history.
So in this fantasy history, because I was wondering, I was like, are we going to explain why it's just like diversity up in this medieval England? Not medieval, I don't know what time period we're in, but
Regency
and then
era.
they give a very brief kind of explanation of it, which I was kind of like, I guess.
It's like, okay.
Like the king married one of us, which made it okay for others. It like allowed us to, which I was kind of like, come on. I mean, it was cool. And Carmela made me research Queen Catherine's history, where apparently there was some rumor that she might have been like I think it was called like a light-skinned mulatto or something like that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. But yeah, the fact that like the king marries a woman of color. So now we have a woman of color queen. So now everyone just like, well, I guess black people are cool. So it was clearly unrealistic, but I understand that they needed some sort of an explanation, or they felt like they needed to give some sort of an explanation as to why like this looks like a sort of a school or like a university diversity poster or something like that.
I mean, I prefer that they gave an explanation than if they were just like,
yeah. But I think it should have been like, I almost wonder if it should have been like, oh, because that marriage was not that. So basically, this integration is very recent, and we don't see anybody have any rate. And you're telling me like the queen and king got married like only a few decades ago, and there's no holdovers of like even that like ancient man that's like willing to marry Marina. Like you're telling me that like because the king married like a woman of color, he's like, yeah, I could do a light skin who's pregnant. Why not? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There's like no racist holdovers. I don't know.
Right. I mean, and the Duke's father like quickly alludes to like, we were given this title and we can lose it if we like, it's only for our line and we can lose it just as easily.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, Carlos, you were. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that when Lady Danbury brings it up in episode 4, it explains, but it's very superficial. Like, we were two separate societies. What kind of separation? Was it like similar to the seeing Black people as subhuman? Because love isn't going to change that. Like, yeah, the king and queen got married and that's great. And the people in their inner circle are like, oh, well, we want to keep our royal, semi-royal status, so we're going to play along. But like in real life, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, like pretty much left England and abdicated their royal status because of the racism that Meghan Markle, who is a light-skinned woman who is not like super dark-skinned, had. Like, it's just very unrealistic given what we know about history. So it's like, I would have liked a little bit more, but I get that that's not the sort of purpose. But it's like,
I also think, though, I will say, I'm not sure like what I would want.
Exactly.
But because what I'll say is also that I know that I believe that one of their goals, and one thing that I've seen some people writing about as something that they did appreciate about it, was also like not to drag like a significant trauma storyline into this story, that people are trying to enjoy as fantasy. So in particular, like Black viewers or people of color who are watching it, to be able to just like also step into the fantasy of it without necessarily having like a really full, like, you know, trauma-based storyline or something that grounds it. So I think there's some benefits to that, to like not kind of being like, and, you know, meanwhile, you know, it's like, so, you know, the real history is like nothing but trauma. So I think that there's some pros to that. But it's dicey. And I do think ultimately, like if I had to do a takeaway, again, like I drew this parallel already back to like Hamilton in the beginning of class. Ultimately, I think it's this kind of like neoliberal kind of mobilization of quote unquote diversity to be like, look, we're still going to tell this story about like aristocratic London in the 1800s. And this is still going to be a fantasy and it's still going to be what everybody wants. And we're going to throw some people of color in there to make it more palatable to like a modern kind of moderate or liberal even audience, without fundamentally undermining power relationships or resource distribution. I think that's the story of our time in a lot of ways. It's just like, okay, great. Like, again, it gets at that like limits of representation. We're going to make people comfortable or like not criticize us maybe for making this show. And not that there's not like good intentional people working on this, because I'm sure there are, but ultimately it's like, you know, we're still telling the same story. And aristocracy of this time period, I literally looked up like how many families was this in London during this time period, because it's a couple of hundred families out of, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, and so it's a fantasy that like it's partly propaganda, right, that we like all watch these like aristocratic period pieces that are always focused on wealthy people and like how they're going to navigate the marriage market. And, I'm not even like, you know, like I said, as an individual, like I enjoyed it, you know, like I dive into it. Same relationship with Hamilton, like love-hate relationship, like great music, really problematic people, and throwing people of color into the story doesn't fundamentally undermine that. But I think that, yeah, I mean, keeping in mind that like this story is not like, it's not like this is the real life and roots of like most European or white people. And like, this is just like, this is white history, you know, like this shit is not realistic for most people. But we still deify it, right? We're still like, this was the dream, like going to balls and shit. So I think there's that, you know. And
I'll give props where I get like, listen, like so much where it's like, oh, we can't because it's not going to succeed in Hollywood. Like this is the most successful show of Netflix ever.
Yeah.
And it is filled with people of color. So I mean that's huge. You know what I mean? So much of like
Hollywood is having just like quantifiable and significant changes in representation.
Yeah, because like one of the things, like, you know, whenever they do like meetings of like, all right, everyone has the European accent, like, you know, like, oh, we can't hire like these because then it's not going to do well. Like this has proven otherwise, which I think is a huge accomplishment, which I do think is very important. So I'll give them props there. But
I don't think that many big Hollywood properties can do well without like addressing diversity in one way or another at this point. Like, I think audiences like want more representation for people of color and want more queer representation and want like more diverse women characters. And especially if you look at like younger people as the demographic, like that's that 25 to 30 or that 18 to 30 or whatever, like that's the demographic that studios are going for. So I do think there's been like a significant shift, not enough still. And also definitely not enough behind the camera and in creative roles.
Yeah.
And then the colorism issue is I think really even coming to the forefront even more as Hollywood's like, well, okay, so we'll cast some lighter skinned people of color. One thing I'll say before, sorry, I passed the mic to Carlos, is that I also I did appreciate that there was also some South Asian and Asian kind of representation, somewhat. We'll see in terms of like more meteor speaking roles. But that's something that I feel like sometimes Hollywood shows skip over because like, they'll cast white people and black people, and it's just like, there's no people in the middle. So I think, we'll see how that goes. It wasn't perfect. But
was the artist's wife South Asian, or am I the artist guy, his wife?
She was a woman of color. I don't know exactly.
I wasn't sure. Like I was like looking, I was like, wait a minute. So
yeah, she was somewhat ambiguous, which I think works for Mela, your point that like, yeah, we need to sort of have more of this. But yeah, I think because these things are becoming viable, because queer stories, because stories of people of color, especially Black people, are financially viable, we need more of them. We need more of them written by people of color. We need more skin tone variation, body type variation. Like these things can sell, these things can do well. But I think they need to be done well. Like when Mela brought up Hamilton and this doesn't intend to be historically accurate. This doesn't intend to be like, this is the history of Regency in London. No, it's a fantasy. It's an alternative reality. It's an alternative telling, which I think is dope and can get into. But if we're going to go fantasy with something like race, can we go a little bit further and not just have a bunch of light-skinned folks running around London being aristocrats? Can we have a more perhaps powerful middle class or lower class trying to alter some of this? Like if there's only a couple hundred families that are at the top of this society, when Lady Featherington takes Marina, who acted her ass off, Ruby Baker, like acted her ass off, like why is there not more interaction with the locals there? Like even if it's some like cliche superficial thing, like something to sort of expand out the universe, which again, not what the show's about.
Kind of have it with Will and his family.
Well, okay, I was just gonna say that like Will, who we haven't even talked about, but I'm glad they at least gave him a family and that he wasn't just in those boxing scenes. But they had a whole little fleshed out family. I'm like, okay, I see you. I hope I think they're deeply, I feel like they've still got story because he was part of it.
I was like, listen, any minor characters you want expanded on, mine was Will and his family for sure.
Yeah, so there was Will and his family. There's also the dressmaker.
Yes.
Madame de la Croix, who was not really French. That was awesome.
I love that reveal.
That was fun. Sienna, the opera singer. So I enjoyed that because those are characters. They're not like peasants characters. They're like that middle kind of like shopkeepers, artisans, tradespeople. And what's interesting about that, and then everything with the artist, I mean, the artist was aristocratic, but his whole setup with some of the other people, and they have that one quick scene like, oh yeah, they'll never like take the concerns of ordinary people seriously. It was like side chatter. I think that's a really interesting world to explore that we don't get a lot of, like shopkeeper kind of level of that time period. So there were some fleshed out characters that I think have more story there. It's not the same as having stories about like literally working class people. But I think trying to shoehorn that into this particular story wouldn't work.
In kind of into that world. I really wanted to explore more of like Will and the dressmaker.
I think we will. I think
we have to.
But I think, the moral of the story is still there's other stories to tell. That instead it doesn't always have to be I mean, we all have a good time with the escapism, but it doesn't always have to be the story about the aristocracy. and how much you want to be that. You're like, look at these houses and the balls, and they're like, thank you. Next.
Let's talk real quick about. I love what that they took.
I loved it too.
Like contemporary music and made it like violin, like ball music. I was like, that is dope. I found this soundtrack on Spotify. I was like listening to it while I was doing work. So yeah, big fan.
Yeah, no, it's really nice and adds to the fantasy element, sort of making it contemporary, but also in the past. I did like when Eloise is trying to figure out who Lady Whistledown is. She thinks it's a servant because servants are like in the houses and know what the gossip is and no one will pay attention to them. But then the lady's like, you think a servant has time? A servant has time to like write all of this gossip
down? You don't got time
down?
for your shit, man. Like, that was funny.
That was hilarious. She's like, I want your ass. Like, I don't have time to do anything, this other stuff. And Eloise was like, damn, I feel kind of stupid. I was like,
yeah, which is one of the few moments where someone from the lower, and even being a servant in an aristocratic household isn't like the lowest of the low, but like,
no, it's not.
To be dragged like that, it's like, yeah, you deserve that. And maybe not Eloise in particular, but like the aristocrats need to be dragged like that. Like, y'all don't understand what this life is like.
Let's talk about Eloise and Whistledown then, because...
Yes, let's do it.
Also, number one, when the queen finds out that Eloise is doing her search, first of all, I couldn't stand the queen. She got on my nerves so much. She always had that real stank face, like always, like just in a nasty mood, like really. And I remember being like, come on, man, you have like a black queen and she's like this like impatient, childish, like stubborn character. It drove me crazy, you know what I mean? And sorry, I had to go on a real rant.
I didn't feel that way about her at all. I felt
like she was, are you kidding me?
I felt like she played it with this like sweetness under the whole time. And then when you see her with the husband, you're like, oh, she loved her husband, and he's like, you know, he's got whatever, like amnesia or whatever he has.
What the fuck?
And then she like, when they came to see her because they loved each other so much, she was like, wow, then like, you're very wise to see friendship as like the basis of love. I see what you're saying though, like now that you said it, but it just was not like my first.
Like, ma'am, your husband dead? No. Oh, then go away. I was just like,
no, but dude, she's worried about it.
Understand.
She's trying to put a tough exterior on her heart.
I think that's also part of it. She's got to put the front on because she's the queen. She can't be like Daphne, smiling at everybody.
When Daphne like doesn't marry her nephew, she goes on this like rant. She's like, I have to be right. Fine, you're not going to get a marriage license. Fine. Like there is so much. And then when Eloise, you're taking too long, girl, your queen commands it. Fine, we find someone else. Get out of my face. Like sweetness bullshit. What kind of sweetness is that?
Well, I definitely get the petty because homegirl is spilling tea that's causing drama in her court. Like Lady Whistledown is a shit starter and I live for it. It's Gossip Girl meets Pride and Prejudice, and I live.
Yeah. So what are there any like super big things we haven't talked about?
Let's talk about sexuality, I think.
Yeah, the second brother. What is it? Oh, Benedict.
Yeah. So, by the way, I just realized at the very end when they were like, I guess we have to give him an A name to follow tradition. I was like, wait, what? And then I was like,
me too. I totally missed it.
Colin, Daphne, Eloise, Francesca, George. Wait,
real cute.
Yeah, I don't remember the youngest siblings' names. They don't matter. But I loved some of the stuff that they did with sexuality. I'm like, if we can do race differently, why can't we do sexuality differently in this fantasy setup? Initially, I totally texted Mel. I was like, yo, Benedict gay. Like, I think that was the entirety of the text.
I was watching it with my fiance and my mom and my sister-in-law, and we were like, gay! And we'll see.
Yeah, because you have him and Eloise on the swing set. She's smoking. He catches her. They smoke together. And he's like, well, you're not the only one who doesn't want to, like, follow expectations or whatever. And I was like, Yay! And then he hangs out with the artist because he wants to be an artist. And I'm like, okay, there's vibes. The artist and him are going to be a thing. I was half right. The artist does have a thing. He is married to a woman and they both do their own thing because she's saved from spinsterhood and poverty by being married to someone, and they both like live their lives and do what they want to do. So y'all can't see, but they're laughing.
We're having, because we do a video conference call, and Carmela just put on her phone while Carlos is like having conversation with like apparently himself, but she just put on the phone like messing with her hair and giving directions.
Sorry, Carlos.
No, it's fine. Like, so they have this open relationship, which you wouldn't really expect. He's like, I'm in love with another lord and we can never be together, which immediately drives Benedict into the arms of Madame Delacroix. Like, it's like, oh, you can do whatever you want? Okay, I'm going to go find a woman to be with, which he's allowed to do what he wants. His sexuality wasn't set in stone. It's not like they overturned anything or flipped any plot scripts, but I was like, one of the siblings got to be gay, like at least one.
There's 8.
I think with him, I feel that he's another one that like his future story is gonna retroactively for me like make or break his role in this first season. I do feel like they set him up like it's a little bit queer baiting. If they kind of set him up as like he seemed like he was maybe going to be a queer character.
Mm-hmm. And hook up with the artist at the party.
And hook up with the artist or like realize that there's possibilities or something, because he kept having a few different scenes where he was like, you know, like he was just like talking shit in the corner with Eloise. That was fun. Or saying things like he didn't want to be part of
I love their
conventions, like
relationship,
Carlos said.
actually.
Their relationship was fun. So I feel like if they don't pay that off, I'm not sure how I feel about that. Not great. But I'm not sure. I think I'm not sure what they're gonna do with the character. I do enjoy the world that we got to go into through the artist studio. That is
all these period pieces with artists, they're always having orgies. Like, oh, like every period piece that has an artist, but they come to my house to paint and like, just kidding.
We're having sex on the stairs.
I mean, we're painting our bodies.
Painting my ass, painting my dick. Anyway, so no, that's always like the art. Every artist in like an older period is just boom, boom, boom. Anyway, what were you saying? I'm sorry.
I just wanted more. Like, it seemed like it was being set up that there was going to be this queer relationship or the possibility for it, and maybe some rejection, like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can do this. And then going back to it. And then they just didn't. Like, it just ran in the other direction. And so as I was watching, I'm like, okay, we're in an alternate reality in this fantasy where race doesn't have the same historical issues that it would have if this was a realistic piece set in this actual era in English history and European history. We can't have a little more wiggle room for the homos, for the LGBT folks, for the queer folks. Like, where the gays at? Like, we know they were there. They may not have been out, obviously, because of the era that they lived in. But there's lots of historical evidence that people were in same-sex relationships inside and outside of marriage. So why couldn't we get a little bit more of that, given how we got to see it on screen briefly with him and this other dude?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Maybe
Yeah, I would very much.
The king married a black woman, not a gay man, Carlos.
I would like to
One
see
thing at a
more.
time. No, but
would
I
like to
get
see
what you're
more,
saying.
for sure.
It's like, well, how come if race isn't a thing, why is sexuality still a thing?
I mean, they're not the same thing. I'm not trying to equate
No.
race and
I
sexuality at all.
Yeah.
And
I'm
this
just
show
making
is
sure the listeners know.
And the show is built. It's built around the marriage market and how central that is in people's lives. But I'm interested to see what they do with it. I really hope that they give some more meat to queer storylines in future seasons.
And they
I'm
planted
hopeful
it.
that they will.
because he talks to
Definitely
the
Sorry.
artist.
it. Like,
and
I
it's
feel like they
Come on,
planted
like,
it 6 times.
Where I was like, give him more meat.
Because he's like, second sons
Damn,
don't
Lord.
have the pressure of the first son. So Anthony has to get married. Anthony has no choice
Oh, yeah.
given the marriage market. But Benedict can do whatever he wants as long as Anthony doesn't die. So like,
Benedict's got 3 other brothers, man. Dude.
like he's got options. So why, if he's got options as the second son and not the eldest, is he not able to dig into some of that in the show, given how big it is, how good that could be for young queer people watching the show, in the same way that a lot of conversations about representation always go. It's like, oh, I can be that too. We don't really get that same gratification in this series, at least in this season.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I'm interested to see what they
Which
do
of the
going
sibling
forward.
stories are you guys most interested out of the 8? Like, which ones would you want to see? I'll be honest, I'm not thrilled about Anthony whatsoever. I don't think.
So
Mine would have to be. I really want to know
Yeah,
what's
she's
going on
dumb.
with her.
So spoiler alert for things that I've read about the books.
No,
If
don't
you're
do it.
listening. No?
No.
Okay, never mind. I'm interested to see what else is introduced other than, I don't think it's going to be like that much about Anthony, the second season. So I'm interested to see what else is introduced. Of course, Eloise is like the story that I want to hear. And I'm interested to see what they do with Benedict, if they do make him a queer character, and how they write that journey then in that
Mhm.
in the context. Beyond that, I feel like I guess it was Colin. I don't know what he's doing. So we're like a little tight on time, and there's a few things I wanted to just mention really quickly that we didn't get to talk about. Sorry that was a little bit of like an abrupt switch, but we're a little tight on time. I just wanted to say 2 things that we didn't get to talk about and that I haven't seen as much. One thing actually did come up, but like in the middle when the Duke is being like a pain in the butt. And Prince Friedrich is like here,
Friedrich.
available, and like emotionally intact, knows what he wants. I'm like, you're just like,
Here's the thing. If you were Daphne and you had, who would you pick and where in Prussia would you live with your future king? Like, let's be real. Like, it's very clear to me. I was
he's like, I would love to
this
live in
pick-
London. I can't do
Like, first
the
of
like
all,
accent he was doing.
you'd be a fucking princess. Like, good for you. Second of all, the Queen of England would be thrilled with your decision, and you have that going on. Third of all, this dude is open. He's communicative. He's understanding. Even when she breaks it off, he just asks why. And he says, I respect your decision. And the Queen's like, you need to fight.
So
He's
healthy.
like, I'm not fighting for her.
So
She made her
healthy.
decision. Like, it was like was I thought a way better match. You know what I'm saying? Like,
It's tough. Like you're watching, and it's like in that episode, watching me and all my like my mom and my sister-in-law were like, drop, like forget it, like go with the prince, man. Like he knows what he wants, but of course you still like the big story is the Duke. So like you just want them to get back together. But it sets up and reinforces that thing again, that it's like you wanna go for the like mysterious troubled man that you need to fix.
right.
Trope. So I did nothing but see that exact storyline for all of life. So that's a little bit like not the best. And the other thing I wanted to just give voice to for a quick minute is also, I haven't seen as much about this on like the talk pieces, but this setup for like of Daphne and the other young ladies, but Daphne is like the epitome of this, of like so like doe-eyed and innocent, doesn't even know like that the seed, the sperm needs to come into the vagina to make the baby. And like then on top of that, when they do have sex, it's like, oh, like how wonderful this is. And it's just like, now I want sex all the time because you've shown me what it is. that to me, like this has not gotten a lot of play in like the critique pieces. And I'm like, yo, this is some really dangerous shit, because this is something that fuels rape culture. Sorry, we're talking about rape again. But this fuels that idea of like, she doesn't really know what she's talking about, but she can be shown, and then she's gonna love it when she finds out. And that setup of like that innocence, and then again followed immediately by just like, oh, like I can like touch myself, it's so warm and fuzzy, and then like, oh, like you're gonna put your penis inside me, that doesn't hurt at all. Like it's just like, it's great, it's always great after like, that. I know, I didn't even get to talk about that. But I'm not saying that's like the worst, but it's to me like it's so, and it flew under the radar with this show, I felt like, and I think it's like pretty fucked up.
Yeah, I want to ask you then, because there was something that I noticed that I remember like thinking like, oh, I kind of want to ask Carmela about this. In the sex scenes, something that I did notice was that, and I give props to Simon, he was very that's when his communication skills went up. He was like, do you like this? What do you want me to do? Tell me what you want me to do. How does this feel? Are you okay? Hey, this might hurt. Just let me know. Do you want me to stop? Like I was kind of like, okay, that's something that you don't normally see in sex scenes either, where like the guys are very much about like her pleasure. You know what I mean? And we see him go down on her a bunch of times. We've never seen her. We've never seen her go down on him, which is also something that I was just like, oh wow, that's. But so, and I wonder then, does his because in a sense, all his questions are forms of consent. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, where does that factor in? And because I understand it completely, your critique of it. But I also wonder, like, is that something to pay attention to as well? Because people say, like, oh, but asking all these questions, like, makes it, like, less sexy. Like, that was pretty sexy of a scene to me. Like,
yeah, I think, no, that's a good point, Omar. Like, I think that's really powerful to see him set up kind of affirmative consent multiple times and it be sexy still, right? Like, you didn't see that a lot when we were younger, in my opinion, and in my memory.
We never saw that.
Yeah. So I do think that stuff was good. So I'm just like the overall dynamic of the like doe-eyed, now you can show me the world. And it's just like, awesome. I love having sex with you. That general arc, I think can still be, it can still set up this idea of like what femininity looks like as transitioning into like sexual relationships. And so I think it's it's a little tough, but I thought some of those scenes were great.
And Daphne calls out her mother for it, but I don't know if it's enough or if it's enough of a shift for the show that now they can have those open conversations, because I don't know if they're there yet. Which just underscores your point that like what's left hanging versus what's explicitly talked about versus who the audience is. The contemporary audience matters in what we're making a fantasy, what's realistic, what's not, in this type of a story that is so popular.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carlos. And since we're out of time, I think we might want to end there and just do a quick plug. Or unless
we're gonna talk about Whistledown real quick. the big reveal.
I mean, I don't know if we're gonna have enough time to go.
Oh shit! Sorry. Yeah. Well, I was shocked that it was Penelope. I'm just gonna say that.
I wasn't shocked. I mean, two of the people I was watching with thought it was her, and I thought it was Madame Delacroix.
I thought it was
like you did. Well. I knew one of them was a red herring. I thought Penelope was the red herring because I felt like they set up a lot of clues that it was her, but it turned out that Delacroix was the red herring. So I wasn't shocked. I thought it was cool. And I think my guess is they'll switch it at least once over the course of, if they do like multiple seasons, like she'll get found out and somebody else will take up the mantle. That's you heard it here first, folks. But I thought it was cool. We didn't talk enough about Penelope, but maybe, next time. We
didn't talk anything about Penelope. And she was awesome.
Maybe we could talk about her a little bit in our live or something, Carlos. But I enjoyed her as well. And that actor is also awesome.
Yeah.
She was awesome sauce. All right, folks, that's our episode. We know that there is a lot more that you want to talk about. There's a lot that we didn't get to. So, oh, yeah. There's a lot we didn't get to. So please follow us on Instagram at Play.Hype.Dialogue and talk with us. Let us know your thoughts on what we said here, what we didn't get to, and more. Please like and review us on Apple Podcasts, and tune in next month for our next episode.
Do you want to do hype stars?
Ooh, hype stars.
Yes.
For me, it's 4.
Ditto.
I'm going to go 3.5. Yeah.
All right, beautiful. So hopefully we'll be back for season 2 of Bridgerton in like a year or so when it comes out, and we'll see if that affirmed our hype stars or if the rating goes down. It's great being back, everybody.
Yeah, it's great talking with y'all. Thanks for tuning in. We missed you.